have a question for you. Raise your hand if you ever wanted to be a superhero. Raise your hand if you ever looked in a mirror and maybe imagined yourself with a cape or holding a sword. Me too. When I was a little girl, after being exposed to Chernobyl disaster, I spent many nights in the hospital, dreaming of being a hero, dreaming of being just like the very superheroes and fictional characters that I read about. I was 3 years old when my family and I were exposed to Chernobyl disaster. Much like what's happening in Flint, Michigan right now, our water too was polluted. Our fruit was inedible. For me, this exposure resulted in many health problems. As a result of this, my immune system was almost entirely shut down. I was frequently in the hospital, and in particular, when the weather would change, when it would rain, I would get severe nosebleeds, as well as overwhelming migraines and seizures. When I was 12 years old, my family and I immigrated to the United States. I was in 7th grade. Does anyone remember 7th grade? Yeah, kids weren't very nice to that weird girl who didn't really speak English, who came from radiation-exposed country. So I was bullied and picked on. Many kids would ask me facetiously if I would glow in the dark, if I was contagious, and many of them would ask each other in front of me not to touch me because I was, quote, radioactive. On most days, I just wanted to die. Well, all of that changed a few years later when I saw this movie. Any X-Men fan here? Yes. Me too. That movie forever changed my life, and this is why. The movie is about a group of people who are all mutants of some kind, who all have some kind of a mutation, most of whom were exposed to radiation, just like me. And guess what? They were able to use their changes, not to feel sorry for themselves, but actually to help other people. Even though they were ostracized by society, they were picked on and bullied just like I was, they managed to find a way to use their differences to be stronger, to be better, to be different. Those of you that were here yesterday might remember David Randall saying that whatever makes you weird makes you wonderful. Well, I wish I had someone like that tell me that when I was in junior high school. I didn't, but I had the X-Men. And I remember watching X-Men First Class and hearing Mystique tell her friend Beast, "What wouldn't I give to be normal?" And back then, I felt that way too. But I also realized something else. Through my connection with Storm, do you guys remember her? She's one of the X-Men. She's my favorite. I love Storm so much. So Storm, it's a really unique origin story. She was exposed to trauma at an early age. She was actually terrified of contained spaces as a result of it, but she found her connection with the weather. And because of that, she was able to become a superhero. And you know what? I realized that just like Storm, I too am connected to the weather. And that was the first time that I rethought my situation, and instead of seeing myself as a victim, I saw myself as a survivor. And I thought maybe my story can help other people too. So years later, when I got my doctorate, I started working with people with post-traumatic stress disorder to help them develop what's called post-traumatic growth, which means finding meaning in our trauma, finding another way to connect so that we can become our very heroic selves. And when I was working with service members, in particular Marines with post-traumatic stress disorder, many of them would tell me this. They would say, "I wanted to be Superman, I failed." Doesn't that just break your heart? These incredibly courageous men and women, having come back from seeing the most atrocious things in the war, the most awful traumas, believed themselves to be a failure just because they developed a mental health disorder. So I started asking them, "Tell me about Superman. Is he really invincible, or does he have a vulnerability?" Anyone? Kryptonite. Yes, kryptonite, right? Kryptonite is this green substance from Superman's home planet that makes him sick, and in fact, in large enough quantities, it can kill him. Now, here's the question. Just because he's vulnerable to kryptonite, does this make him any less of a superhero? No. In fact, every single superhero out there has some kind of a vulnerability, and guess what? It is not despite of it, but because of it, that they're stronger, better, and more amazing superheroes. And I was able to incorporate this into therapy to help my patients understand that just like Superman, they too are incredible. So over time, I started implementing other measures of popular culture into therapy to help my patients understand how they might be able to recover. So you might ask, why superhero therapy? Why is this important? Well, I want to ask you, have any of you ever felt depressed or anxious or traumatized or maybe felt somehow ashamed, like no one would understand what you're going through? How many of you at that time alienated instead of talking to other people? The reason why we do that is because we experience a really painful emotion of shame. When we are struggling the most, we're likely to experience shame. We're likely to alienate from other people and feel that our experiences somehow make us unworthy of love and belonging, right when we need it most. Now, when that happens, we're less likely to engage in our core values, less likely to help other people, and are likely to feel even worse about ourselves. But guess what? The opposite happens when we are able to connect with our core values. When we start helping other people, when we start connecting with others, our bodies actually boost these magical substances, these chemicals like oxytocin and dopamine and serotonin that help us feel better about ourselves and improve our physical and mental health functioning. And by incorporating certain heroes, fictional or real life, into therapy to help people understand that they're not alone in their experiences can actually help them feel less alone, less ashamed, and more likely to seek help. So whether it's someone like Batgirl, for example, who, any of you familiar with Batgirl? Batgirl is this amazing superhero. She is a librarian and scientist by day and a superhero by night. And in one of the issues, she was shot and devastatingly injured by the Joker, leaving her paralyzed and deeply traumatized. I was able to use this character in my work with many disabled veterans to help them overcome their trauma. There's one more story I'd like to tell you, and it's a story about a 15-year-old girl that I was working with. My patient was experiencing a lot of depression. She also had an eating disorder, and she frequently cut herself. She felt like she had no friends, she was severely ashamed of herself, and she was bullied in her school. When I met with her, she told me that the only thing that brings her any joy is this TV show, Veronica Mars. Now, at that time, I didn't know anything about Veronica Mars, so in order to better connect with my patient, I decided to go home and watch the pilot. Well, I accidentally ended up watching the entire season in one night. The show is that good. If you haven't seen it, go home and watch it. The reason why the show is so good is because of how real it is. It starts out talking about some of the tremendous and horrific things that teenagers face these days. The character of Veronica Mars, when the show first opens, has already experienced sexual assault, severe bullying, alienation, her family falling apart, and several other issues. What actually helps her recover is that she's able to connect with the one skill that she's really, really good at, which is being a detective. She's basically a teenage Sherlock Holmes. So she starts helping out the police department. She also volunteers for her dad, who is a private investigator, and solves several murders and helps other people in her school, making her the most incredible, most heroic person in her town. So when I came back to see my patient, I told her, Veronica used the skill that she had to help other people. She used her detective skill to help others. What do you have? And my patient looked at me with her eyes full of tears, and she said, I have depression. So I said, okay, well, does anyone else in your school have depression? And she said, I don't know. Maybe a couple of people. So I said, well, what would Veronica do? And she said, Veronica would try to help. Maybe she would make a speech. So I said, okay, is that what you'd like to do? And she said, yes. A few weeks later, this incredibly courageous girl stood up in front of her entire class, and she told them her story. She told them that she struggled with depression, as well as an eating disorder and frequent cutting, and that as difficult as it was for her, she was now seeking help, and she was starting to get better. She invited other students to come speak to her if they were struggling with these issues, and she offered her heart and her ear to anyone that needed her. The effect was unlike anything she or I ever anticipated. Everyone in the class was crying, including the teacher. The word quickly spread around the entire school about this speech, and everyone was hugging her, texting her, or emailing her, thanking her for speaking out, because most of the kids in that school also suffered with similar issues, but were too afraid to speak out, were too afraid to talk to anyone about this. Her courage allowed other people to talk about their struggles, and because of her, mental health was no longer stigmatized in her school. So I would like to invite you to be heroes. I would like you to utilize the powers that you have, whatever it is, whether it's speaking, writing, drawing, anything that you have to help other people. Because you matter. You matter, you make a difference, and every action that you make can help others. So I would like to invite you today to be your very kind of superhero, and don't forget your cape. Thank you.
The Hero Roundtables are the global events that ask the question, what is a hero? You've just seen one hero talk. To find more and join the conversation, visit our website or social media.